I hear. What, we live? Oh, welcome to the April edition of NMRAx. Speed escaped the helix here on a beautiful lake in Bella Vista, Arkansas. But never mind that. Our next clinician lives in Kokomo, Indiana, and is married with 3 children and 8 grandchildren. A member of the NMRA since 2016, he's been actively involved with the Central Indiana Division of the Midwest region since retiring in 2021. He's the superintendent of the HO-scale Wildcat Valley Railway, a freelance model railroad depicting the early 20th century summer here in the U.S. He started the layout in 2019 and says it will be finished exactly one day before he kicks the bucket. Question is, what's he going to do on that day then? Please welcome Dave Machino.
Thank you. Good to be with you. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen here, I guess. Okay, can you see that and everything? We're good. Like many model railroaders, I caught the bug early in my youth. Layout in my basement. Although we never really finished it, I learned a lot doing that. The seeds of model railroading were firmly planted. This guy in the picture, he really wasn't my dad. He didn't look quite like that. So. Well, enough about me. Let's talk about water. I made this clinic for giving live, so I ask how many of you are planning to model water or are modeling water on your layout, but nobody's here to answer that. So I'll just say there's quite a few in the last clinic I did. So. Since 71% of the Earth's surface is covered with water, it makes sense that you might want to have some water on your layout. First of all, let's take a look at some pictures of some water scenes and kind of get some idea of what we're thinking about here. This is the bridge over the Snake River. The scene here is probably a little bit much for most layouts. You can see the water is calm with some very light ripples. The water is not really blue. That's a reflection of the sky. So when you're modeling water, you probably want to use a shade of green or brown to represent it. Here's a couple of scenes with some falling water. The one on the left could be modeled on most any layout. The scene on the right is a pretty impressive scene. The falls under the bridge really make for a nice scene. Here's a gently flowing stream reflecting the gray sky. It looks like it's wintertime here. The rocks and the islands are creating some rapids to add interest to the scene. This is the Animas River in the San Juans. My wife and I took a trip out west and rode to Durango and Silverton. I snapped this shot. The water's flowing pretty fast here. This is another shot of the Animas River. You can see the water really is a shade of green. Here's some waterfalls showing the variations caused by distance and speed. The Feather Falls in the Sierra Nevadas there on the left. It's a 410-foot waterfall. You see how it kind of spreads as it goes down toward the bottom. On the right there is a falls cascading down just some rocks, which kind of slow the descent. And notice the waves in the foam at the base of that falls. And here's the big falls. I don't know if you'll get to see this nice motion like I do. It might be kind of stop motion for you. But this is in Niagara Falls. I'm asking another question here. What do all these features have in common besides water? And I'll answer that. They're actually actively changing the terrain. So whether you're modeling a gully or a gorge on your layout, water probably created that terrain and it could be modeled. Here's some of the topics that I'll be covering in this clinic. There are, of course, many ways to create water scenes. The ones I show here are my approach, and it worked well for me. Please feel free to ask questions. I guess we'll reserve that toward the end of the presentation here. Then I'll go over the inspiration and design for Mystic Falls, the construction of the land features in the falls area, preparing the riverbed and using the resin, some of the woodland scenics, water effects, and creating waves and rapids. And then I'll also have a few examples of a couple of other water scenes that I've created. The first scene is the Mystic Falls that I'll be talking about. Here's some background on why I designed what I did. I've got an HO scale layout. It's 2 decks. The lower deck is 42 inches and the upper deck is 60 inches. I didn't want a conventional helix connecting those 2 decks, so I created this this 7 by 11 foot, kind of a non-prototypical, but I think it's interesting area. I also wanted a very area of interest where people entered my layout, which was near here. And I get inspiration from YouTube and the internet, and I also get some inspiration from taking layout tours. I enjoy that very much. In 2017, I went to the NMRA convention and toured the Sundance Central, which is no longer there, but the waterfalls that they had created really caught my eye. So I asked one of the fellows there how they created that, and he said the froth effects at the base of the falls and in the water was polyfiber, and from a distance it looked pretty realistic. Another source is the Woodland Scenics video on modeling waterfalls and rapids. They've got some really great ideas on how to use their water effects product. Of course, Luke Boulder Creek Railroad is one of my favorite sources for modeling ideas. So I use ideas sources and kind of put them together. The picture here is from the November 2024 issue of the NMRA magazine. I decided to create a clinic to share some of these techniques that I used, and the same techniques. I use the same techniques for other water scenes on my layout as well. So. Here you can see that I keep our outlets in business. This is some of the underlying bench work of the waterfall, the Mystic scene. I like sturdy bench work. I really don't ever plan to move this layout, so you can also see I've been practicing on the masonite backdrop above there. So. I use many different materials when I'm creating a scene like this. You can kind of see that here. I used some extruded foam in the back. I used I made 3 levels with plywood and leveled that. I poured the resin, I would have a good level surface. So the other area here when I with screen wire, I like the aluminum window screen. I used to use cardboard strips, or I did that on a previous layout. I didn't like the effect as well as I do the window screen. It's use some leftover plywood and extruded foam supports, and then glue the screen with hot glue this before I place the screen. I usually crinkle it up a little bit. It gives it a little bit more strength and adds a little more character to the scene. I then cover that screen and everything else with plaster cloth and a thin coat of plaster. These are some of the rock molds that I use to create the many rock castings that I would need to create the scene, as you'll see later. These are just Woodland Scenics rubber molds. And I used a lot of them. So here I'm adding rock castings to the area. I pressed the rock castings into the plaster, a coat of plaster, while the plaster is wet, and it'll kind of ooze out between them. But you kind of scrape that off and shape it and make it look like the surrounding rock as best you can. I varied the orientations of the castings so it didn't look like I used the same castings everywhere. I also broke some of them up and partially filled some of them to make them look a little different. Some of the rock shapes I carved to. I just globbed some plaster on and tooled it while it was hardening up, and just kind of shaped it while the plaster hardened. The plaster of Paris that I use is softer than hydrocal. I find it more easily carved, especially after it hardens up. The screen and plaster cloth covered with the plaster of Paris makes a pretty solid base. I didn't find any problem with it, having to worry about it collapsing or anything. These are some of the tools that I used. I've got some palette knives there for shaping the rocks, some brushes for kind of wet once I got it shaped the way I wanted to, and then I used the chisel for carving and cleaning up later on. This is a shot where the rock work has been completed, and I worked on a couple other projects while this was in this state. We just called this Snowy Mountain. Here, I'm adding the color washes. I used artist acrylics diluted with water for washes. I used some red and brown and yellow, and created some accents in some areas where it looked good to me. And then I finished up the whole scene with a black wash, a diluted black wash, which makes the rocks kind of look gray there. I had some areas where extruded foam was showing. I covered the areas with plaster, a thin coat of plaster. Any unsealed foam will emit a lot of gas when you go to pour your resin. So you want to make sure you seal that foam before you pour the resin. Toward the sides, this color, as you'll see later, didn't really matter very much to the finished product. I went in and did my static grass and some bushes and vines that would be behind the waterfall area. The green you see down there in the riverbed is just some loose stuff for scenery. After I added the static grass above here, I placed some small rock castings in the riverbed. Then I added some sand and some talus and some stained plaster chips that were left over from my carvings that I had done earlier. I the sand and talus with thin white glue. You can see here, let me get my pointer later on, and then just kind of disguise that area as some rapids. Water effect. This is the lower bed. It's ready for pouring. I added some rock castings in the bed and a couple of logs here and there. You can see the sand and the pebbles. Kind of obscures that paint anyway, so you don't really see much of bed. I used painter's tape for a dam and then backed that up with a block of wood just to make sure it held in place. You want to, when you're getting ready to pour your resin, you want to make sure you put down a drop cloth, because the resin's going to do its best to get on your floor if it can. Several choices to model water. I chose the Envirotex Light. I've been pretty happy with the results as long as you use it by the directions. There's very little odor and it's pretty easy to use. I used some pigments that I found on Amazon for coloring resin. Basically, it's for coloring, like for fiberglass resin. I used the brown resin. These little containers, they very, you don't really need to use very much of that pigment. I probably got a lifetime's worth of pigment here in this picture. So my first pour that I started was a little bit on the light side, so I stopped it short, and I mixed up another batch that was darker after. And so after that first pour dried, or set up, I poured another just to make it a little bit darker. So you can't make a mistake with this. I mean, you just gotta try. You just gotta try it. Now, bubbles will form during the curing process. You use a flame near the surface will pop the bubbles. It's the gas from the flame that pops it, not the heat. So you don't need to try to get anything hot or burn anything. I used a small torch, and once you're done here, it's going to leave a glossy, smooth surface. If you're working in an area where there's cover this while it hardens up until usually for me about 24 hours for the resin to get good and hard, and so I could work with it. This shot shows some of the steps in the river working from the back toward the fascia. I wanted some there, so and this is the main falls area. You can see some of the cascading pools off to the right there. I created that we're just going to add some in. Now we're ready to start thinking about your falls, putting the falling water in. You need to take measurements of the lengths that you think you will need of the water strips. You also want to kind of think about what kind of widths you might want to have in your water. Now we're ready to make the water. You want to figure out how many strips you think you'll need, and you probably want to double that because you're going to have some waste and some things. Some of it's not going to look the way you want it to in that area. So, and what you want to do is you lay down some beads of Woodland Scenics water effects in your lengths and widths. I use from 1 to 3 beads, like this. You can do it on wax paper, but I now prefer using a sheet of glass. You want to kind of create an uneven surface to simulate the water, and I can just kind of schmooze the 2 beads together with my fingers, and then I teased in a little bit of white polyfiber. You want varying amounts of the polyfiber, kind of, it should, from left to right here. I don't have any polyfiber at the left, and I've got a little bit more at the right. So as water spreads, I'm shooting for here. I made a few strips without any fiber in them, just to have a little variation as well. Okay, once your water effects is dried, it'll dry clear. I use some Mod Podge, some gloss Mod Podge to give the polyfiber a little bit more body to make it look a little bit more like water and not polyfiber. And then we're ready to paint some highlights for the water and the flow and the froth. I used I kind of dry brushed it on the left. If you look at the left side where there's the Mod Podge, I find it very useful around my layout. There's 2 kinds of it. There's a matte and there's a gloss product. You want to use the gloss for water. You can see the water effects on the right-hand side there in the squeeze bottle. That's a product from Woodland Scenics. It's very thick. The stuff in the bottom of it is difficult to get out. I had a heck of a time getting it out of the one about halfway down. So I started storing it in the upside down position. It's worse than Eileen's tacky glue to get out of there. So. Here I've applied a strip of my falling water. I cut it to the length, and then I used some water effects to actually as a glue to glue it at the top and the bottom to kind of hold it straight. And I found it to work very well. Now your water effect strips, if they stick pretty good to anything like the gloss resin down there, it's nice and glossy down there. That water effect strip will stick to that like glue, so you got to be kind of a little bit careful with it. Now we're starting to look like something here. I've added a few more strips. And this is pretty well the waterfalls complete here. Once I got the falling water the way I wanted it, I applied some gloss Mod Podge. Simulate ripples in the pools of water there. I also used some water effects applied with a brush to create some heavier waves around the base of the falls and around some of the around some of the rocks, to simulate the water flow. And once I got that the way I wanted it, I used some white acrylic dry brushed on to add some highlights. Here you can see this picture is before I added any of the ripples, the Mod Podge. This is as poured. You can see by the reflection of the falls and up the river there, this as poured creates a surface. Here I've added the ripple effects and the rapids beneath the falls and around below the rocks and the logs and anything that might disturb the water. And this picture from kind of shows the effect the dry brushed white paint has to highlight things and make it look like flowing water. You can also see the rocks and debris showing through the resin here. It kind of gives it a little bit of depth, and I think it makes it look more realistic. This is a couple of shots of the river above the Mystic Falls. The resin here was lightly tinted with brown to give the appearance of a clear mountain stream. Once again, I added some highlights to the area above the falls. There's some rocks, and the speed of the water was increasing. And this is a finished view of the Mystic Falls. You can also add sound to a scene, which is what I did for Mystic Falls. I bought a little MP3 player, an SD card, and a speaker for less than $20 from Amazon, and I found a MP3 online of water falling, of a waterfall, and put it on there. I mounted the unit above facing